like to invite Manju Vijayan to the stage to talk in the next section, which is a subject that I know is close to her heart, which is encouraging diversity to drive innovation across the supply chain. And often we think about diversity as in a simple gender basis, but diversity goes much further than that, just in terms of other elements of diversity. And not just in the people sense, but also across our supply diversity as well, reduces risk. So, Manju, if you'd like to perhaps introduce your session. Nice to meet you, Manju Vijayan.
Thank you, Daryl. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I will be moderating a session for the next 45 minutes, as Daryl said, on the subject of encouraging diversity to drive innovation across supply chains. Before I do anything further, I'd like to invite my 4 panelists to come up on stage, after which I shall introduce them. Mr. Sajid Iqbal, William Spindloe, Carmel Perales, and Ms. Lilian Chan. Yes, you can feel free to applaud. Thank you. We just want to drive the message of diversity really, really. Thank you for doing that. Thank you very much. All right, so as Daryl started off describing what the panel is going to look like, all the speaker bios are available on our website, and in the interest of time, I'll keep the introductions really, really short. Sajid Iqbal is the country MD for Linfox Logistics Malaysia. He comes from the industry. He has been with Linfox for a very long time, worked in multiple countries in Southeast Asia, across China, Indonesia, India, Thailand, and has recently moved to Malaysia just over a year ago. Next to him is Ms. Lilian Chan, who I will first congratulate on her promotion. She is the Global Ambassador for HACTL, which is Hong Kong Air Cargo Terminal Limited. Very prestigious appointment. Congratulations, Lilian, and welcome. And next to Lilian is William Spindloe. William is an expert consulting professional. His past experience comes from Europe, Middle East, and Asia, largely from the oil and gas industry. His expertise lies in implementing best practices by developing, managing, and leading strategies, focusing specifically on the people aspect of things, largely employee performance, productivity, process optimization, and profitability. I'm assuming that's rain. And last but not least, or farthest away from me, is Carmel Perales, who is the General Manager Southeast Asia for Logistics Executive. Carmel is a hardcore HR professional, and she's had more than 13 years of experience. She currently operates in a global capacity and leads the Southeast Asia business consulting and executive search teams for the Logistics Executive Group. Welcome everyone, and thank you again. So when we talk about diversity, it's a very commonly used word. I'm sure you all have your own definitions of what diversity is. The dictionary definition of diversity is that it is a belief that people, regardless of their differences, are all entitled to live their lives free from discrimination. And as Daryl said in his introduction, when we talk about diversity, we almost always, the most commonly referred to markers are gender, race, maybe culture, and possibly religion, because those are the more obvious and fairly visible markers of diversity. But today we want to dig beyond that surface, because diversity is about more than just gender and race. It covers various facets. It could be ethnicity, it could be your age, it could be religion, it can be your cognitive abilities, physical disability. There's such a wide spectrum, and today, over the course of the next half an hour, 40 minutes, we would like to welcome your participation as well. I want to skip the traditional format of having the Q&A towards the end. I welcome your participation. As we are speaking, if you have any questions, if it's an opinion, it's a question, you want to disagree, you want to have a direct question asked to any of the panelists, please put your hands up. Our volunteer will bring the mics to you. So with that, I would like to perhaps let each of our panelists make an opening statement. Perhaps you can tell us, what does diversity and inclusion mean to each of you?
Okay, well, diversity and inclusion has been the buzz now. That has been the topic that we hear quite recently. And I think this discussion and panel is actually designed to really identify what are the drivers of diversity and inclusion, what are the impact of diversity and inclusion in the industry. I'm here to talk about talent. How is diversity going to impact the talent market that we have? I think statistics tells us that 57% of the total global population sits in Asia Pacific. That's 4 billion, and about 1.5 billion of that is actually the Generation Y, or the millennials, or the higher crops that we hear of. I think what I would like to know in this panel, and also from the delegates as well, is, are we doing enough to attract this Generation Y into our industry, in supply chain and logistics? So I think that's I would like to hear and address in our 45-minute discussion.
I think from my point of view, which is also kind of from a talent, HR, learning, development point of view, like key drivers are definitely worthy of discussion. I think for many of the territories in the region, it's legislative. Certainly around the world, it seems to be legislative. But I think there's more and more organisations out there looking at the business impact as well. Actually understanding what it can bring to their business, and actually some of the brand recognition that it can bring to their business as well. There's a lot of people who are making their business decision, their purchasing decision, based upon the kind of company that they want to buy from. And I think that's going to be a key part of the discussion. So it'll be interesting to see some of the questions that come out of that as well. I know that when you look at the Fortune 1000 companies, only 21% have an informal kind of diversity and inclusion program. And out of those questioned, 41% of them said that they were a little too busy to think about.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Very glad to be here. Manju summarized it very nicely. Diversity actually is a buzzword these days. A lot of people talk about that, but whatever that means in different people's mind. It can be race, it can be gender, it can be mobility, it can be ethnicity, everything. But to me, it has one more dimension that I should like to personally bring into it, and that actually applies to myself as well. I mean, throughout my own journey in this industry, in the cargo industry, which unfortunately, I should say, is still very much a male-dominating industry. So the aspect of diversity that means a lot to me is actually also the mindset. Because after all, I mean, these days, like it or not, the younger generation is to come up. But how much have we spent the time to understand what their expectations are with regard to the future or from the industry? I'm afraid not many industries or companies have devoted enough time to understand that. And this morning, we also talk about that new buzzword, which I like very much, nomophobia. Mobility. I mean, these days everybody talk about mobile and everything like that. A lot of the industry is changing, the use of technology, and how the next generation is going to come forth to bring around those new insights to help better the industry. What positive mindset we can engender in this new generation to make sure that we have yet more brighter future to come for the industry, for the supply chain. That is something which probably is food for thought. And I have a lot to look forward to from my fellow panelists and also from the audience with regard to what we may do better to instill better diversity into the supply chain.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. For those who don't know who Linfox Logistics are, we're an Australian family business in the 3PL industry in 10 countries with over 23,000 employees, of which 2/3 are in Asia. So for me, diversification is very, very important in terms of employees. As Manju has mentioned already, I've worked in 5 countries with Linfox over my 10 years with the company, and I've met many talented individuals. And diversification is really important for us in terms to grow our business. Let me tell you a little bit what that means in terms of Linfox. In Linfox, we're actually split into 3 organisations. We have an Asian cluster, an Australian New Zealand cluster, and a cluster called Vijayan. And the CEOs, the 3 CEOs in each cluster are all women. And they've all been women over the last 18 months. And we've actually had our best performance as an organisation last year in our 60 years as a business. So that's
I think that there's a round of applause, don't you think, for a 3PL business, as you would know from this industry. it's very unusual to have a woman in the C-suite, and not one but three. I think is a fantastic achievement.
So, you know, once
Sorry
again,
for interrupting, I just had to jump in.
and I know you were keen on that point. But, you know, so, you know, for our organisation, that's a key element of diversification, and it is a family business, and we all know 3PL's logistics is very male-dominated. And secondly, a very important programme for me is the graduate programme. And in Linfox, we have a graduate programme with about 50 to 60 graduates joining the business every year, and they are our future leaders of tomorrow. And once again, 4 of those graduates are in Malaysia, and every country within Linfox is part of this graduate development programme. So once again, another good example of diversification. Thirdly, less prominent in Asia at the moment, but we are looking at implementing something similar, which is a native in-country population. So in terms of Australia, the native Australian population or the indigenous population. So harder for those populations to get work in the workforce in Australia. So Linfox has built a program to allow those individuals to come into the business. And we now have over 300 native Australians in our business in Australia. But for me, the most important one is Southeast or is Asia. And for me in Asia is moving talent within Asia. So for me, I'm very lucky that in Malaysia I have talent from India, Linfox India working in Malaysia, Australia and New Zealand. And I'm also looking at taking some of my talent and being able to allow them to go and work in other organisations within Linfox as well. So all very important elements of the diversification programme.
Thank you, Saj. Before we move away from the gender aspect, I completely agree that we should not speak only of gender when we speak about diversity, because there are so many other things we should be talking about. But while on the subject, why is it that gender always comes to mind first? It's because women do make up 50% of the available workforce, but the representation, particularly in our industry, is not something to be proud of. I could give you a live example of this conference itself. We have over 50-odd speakers today, and we have less than 10. I think we have about 7 female speakers out of 50. That's a little more than 10%. Not something to be very proud of. So yes, I will ask one more question on gender, and then we will, I promise I will go there again. Lilian is probably the best person to address this question, because your journey in the aviation air cargo space, you've been with HSCTO for 14 years now.
Yeah.
Until very recently, she was the executive director, and she's been recently, as I said, promoted to the global ambassador role, which is, it's amazing. So congratulations again. How has your journey been like, Lilian, and what kind of support did you get? You know, because you would have started at the bottom somewhere at some point in time. Who helped you? Was it policies within the company? How did it happen?
Okay, most pleased to share my story here. First of all, I can't pretend to be too young, so I have close to 20 years of experience, not necessarily 100% in air cargo, but more so in aviation, put it this way. And prior to that, I actually first had a taste of this industry by joining a conglomerate, which actually is quite active in Singapore, the Vijayan Group. Where I joined as, let's call it a professional. I do not join as what they call the executive trainee or management trainee, which actually is the key to every door, thinking that you are, Superman, superwoman. Okay. But I'm not joining in that stream. So I joined in the corporate headquarters marketing department, and I helped manage a lot of those marketing programs. And through that connection, I got a secondment opportunity to work in one of Jardines' aviation-related company in the Hong Kong International Airport, which is actually working on what they call the ground support equipment repair and maintenance things. They got a franchise. So overnight, I got moved from a nice room with carpet, nice room, into a workshop. And then, oh, this is not good. It's kind of a downgrade. But it just gave me that, let's say, the determination to move on, because I deal 99.99% with male. That those are vendors, those are suppliers, and those are very much technical in nature, engineering in nature. I know nothing. So you've got to make sure you have that, again, that goes back to my word, the mindset. You have got to make sure you make things happen for you. Anyway, so that was for 3 years and 8 months. And for those who are Chinese in nature, when we talk about 3 years and 8 months, you know what I mean. It's really war, it's fighting, it's suffering. So after that, I got a chance to move to Hector, which is also a part of Jardines' company. And this time, even worse. I moved from a workshop to a warehouse. So it certainly doesn't look too good for me. But again, throughout the years, I make sure that gender is not a hindrance for me, and I also make sure that I understand what is required of a job. And in 2004, I was the first person, the first lady to be promoted in HECTO as a GM. So that actually is, let's say, the first HECTO thing for me. And this time is also this appointment is also something which is the first of HECTO. So again, I'm very glad. But over the years, from being the first GM in the boardroom, in the top team, right now we have about, let's say, half and half, which is a significant improvement. So I think after all, I would like to give a little bit of introduction. It's the company HECTO that spends a lot of effort into retaining people and to give opportunity for ladies to move up to those managerial positions.
Thank you, Lilian. And I think that's proof that if companies do spend the time and the energy to invest in their workforce and not just gender specific, it does give very rich rewards. So, there's a question, yes? Stephanie?
Yeah. As some of you may be aware, diversity is something quite close to my heart, not just from a gender perspective, but also from a race, religion, ability perspective. Fortunately, I've had the good fortune of interviewing a number of people over the last 12 months to do with my PhD. And I'm investigating the influence of national culture on logistics, decision-making and implementation in the region. One of the things that I've noticed in people, not just necessarily females or people of various ethnic backgrounds, when it comes to success, the diversity element to me seems to be that they're people that have come from a variety of experiences, and that was something that just came out in your story. People that do have a variety of backgrounds and are willing to actually subject themselves to multiple different types of experiences and develop a variety of skills and talents with transferable skills that are actually able to go into those roles, and people who are willing to step beyond I'm going to be in marketing or I'm going to be in logistics. In what I've seen has been the ones that tend to rise. Now, whether that's something that men, the stereotypical successful white male or Chinese male or whatever they do naturally, or it's something that is embraced, it's something that came out as an anomaly in my interviews. And so, when your topic is about diversity for innovation, do people that actually have that variety of experience, because of their ability to adapt their skills to multiple circumstances, are they bringing that innovation to the boardroom then? And are actually bringing that innovation with them through their own adaptability. So does diversity actually mean adaptability? That's just a comment from that experience.
Does anybody want to address that?
I don't know if I'm really going to address that problem. I think there's. When I went to school sometime in the early part of last century, apparently, that's what it feels like. We had lessons at school on things like home economics, which were only for girls, and we had typing classes, which were only for girls. It doesn't seem that long ago to me. I realised to my daughter it seemed like 1,000 years ago, but it isn't really that long ago. I think there's a kind of a generational step that we have to almost go through. I think it's very easy sometimes to maybe blame companies for not adopting recruitment policies which favour women a lot more, but I also think that there's a dearth of maybe people in that particular pool. I also think in a lot of traditional households, especially in Asia, girls are just not encouraged to go into certain industries. So it might be engineering, it could be obviously supply chain management, that they generally encouraged to go into something else. So I think that there's some definitions around jobs which are almost stamped and marked with male on it.
Thank you, Lilian. I would agree with that. I think stereotypes do exist for a reason, and the cultural mindset has got to change. We have another gentleman who wants to say something. Can you mic please take it?
Thanks a lot. Chris Osman from Quinte. I actually have a question that is directed at Lilian. So one of the issues I think with women getting up to the top of the organizations, and I think there is quite a bit of written about this on this subject, both in the US and Australia. The women who get up to the top, they do not pull other women with them. So You know what I mean? They're just kind of happy that they succeeded in male's work, if you will. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but are you actually doing something for the women below the organization to kind of open the roads for them as well, or just happy sitting now back in a carpeted, well-carpeted office in a jeans suite?
In my department, is it better? Hello? Stopping me from speaking. In my department, at that time in Hong Kong, firstly it's called the Marketing and Customer Service Department, and then subsequently I rebranded to Commercial and Business Development. A decent sized department, but I actually get 12 out of 14 working for me, or with me. They are all ladies. Not that I discriminate against men, but
Never suggest that.
I'm not saying that women can do the job better, but I mean, after all, in this world, which happened, it just so happened to be male-dominated, there are still a lot of the stereotypes, which I totally agree, but there are still a lot of areas where, like it or not, I think female do a better job. In terms of communication,
Oh boy, I can imagine this is going on.
in terms of communication, in terms of, like for example, I manage all the contracts. The attention to the level of attention to details, for example, I mean, I'm not saying that those are specific jobs for ladies, but because we handle a lot of those contracts and those attention to detail, sometimes I do find that quite naturally, women do the better. But I'm not saying that men cannot do it. So for reason, not particularly an arrangement, but I just, when it comes to time for recruitment, I interview men, ladies, and for reasons I don't understand, ladies cannot. So does that shed any light?
I see another gentleman putting his hands up. Yes, can we just let Saj add on?
Just to kind of echo on your point there, is that in terms of my team, I have 7 direct reports, and 3 of the 7 are ladies, and I recruited all 3 of them myself into the business, not because they're women, but because from a competency perspective, they're the right person for the job. So in terms, I know it's not hard and it's a mindset change, but we should be looking at individuals based on competencies, not based on gender, race, religion, what. And I think the challenge is really up to all of us in this room to break down those stereotypes and those mindset changes and start looking at individuals as individual talent pools based on competencies and who can do the job best. The only other point I would add is whether they have the cultural fit to fit into your organisation as well as the competency fit.
Here's the gentleman with a question.
Yeah, hi, I'm Shivam Sudhar. I'm also a ship captain. That's how I started my career. So I want to share with you that the 2 shipping lines in Singapore, PIL and NOL, they achieved having a female captain, both them. So that's one of the jobs which is always male strength, but they have a female captain running a crew of rest all males. So that's one direction. Thank you.
Thank you for saying that. And it's funny, because the fact that there are female captains is something apparently that needs to be highlighted. No one talks about the 99.9% of the male captains that are there. And that right there is why we have this panel here today in 2015. We are having a discussion on something that shouldn't even be an issue, but we haven't gotten there yet. I think it's a very long journey. But thank you, this is fantastic. Please keep us going through the end of the session. My next question, before I ask that, I just would like to maybe run a quick show of hands with the audience. Now, there are 2 schools of thought when it comes to diversity and inclusion programs within organizations. So one school of thought is that who should be accountable for the D&I programs in the business? Should it be HR? And the second school of thought is, no, it should not be HR. It should sit right at the top, at the board, and it should cascade down through the business. Can I say a show of hands? How many of you think that diversity and inclusion programs belong with HR and should be implemented and managed by them? Shocking, no one thinks so. So everybody agrees that it should cascade from the top? You believe that it should be made by the management? Someone has an opinion at the back? Can we get the mic over there? So you're agreeing, all right then. But what do you people think? What are your opinions? Are you in agreement that, because when we, just to give some background, when we did this, a similar question back in Singapore, there were some diverse opinions, because a lot of people felt that diversity is about people. There is a human resource department which looks after people and everything to do with people, therefore they are best equipped to be the ones that are assigned that particular responsibility. Agree? Disagree?
Hello. All right. Good. Okay. I'm just actually really surprised myself when you asked whether our guest here thinks that HR should take the lead on this. It sends a signal that HR is always perceived to be an admin support as opposed to a strategic partner. But I believe that diversity and inclusion should sit at the board level. As the saying goes, put your money where your mouth is, and I think this is actually a program that has to be cascaded from the board level down. But HR, since they are directly involved in talent and then people management, they should be at the forefront. They should be able to execute, and they should be the advocate for D&I. And I think that they need to work hand in hand together, but I think it still sits at the board level.
Yeah, and I think if it does come from the top, then why isn't HR on the board of directors? Why don't we have a CHRO? Because it's just something about investing in people, worldwide, and yet initiatives like this are always seen as being an expense. Yet we always talk about people being our biggest assets and things like that. I think that we need to have more people reporting to the board of directors if we're going to have initiatives like this, being far more pervasive in organisations.
For me, this one's a little bit like the chicken and egg situation. What comes first? I think you need HR to be able to advise on some of the initiatives. So, for example, in Linfox, the Native Australian programme, if that didn't get raised via HR to our board of directors, it may never have come about. So sometimes we need HR and their speciality and expertise to raise those elements. But it definitely has to come board down in terms of the organisation. However, I still believe elements such as gender and religion should be non-negotiable. It should not be directed from the business. It should just be a natural progress.
I think that my fellow panelists actually will have consensus, and they nicely summarize it all as well. Certainly from the HECO perspective, that drive definitely is from the top, and it's very much from the rest of the CEO. But I also agree, HR has a role, and to me, HR also plays the role of the speaker. If there's anything that they need to flag, whether that is something true to one side or whether there's something that should have been done yesterday, HR certainly in the HECO organization fit that role very nicely. So I think eventually it is not simply a board level work or a CEO's work, but the entire top tier must be seen as having that very coherent management commitment into seeing that and introducing that diversity. And that's the only solution for the success, I think.
So I guess we're all in agreement of the fact that it has to cascade from the top down. The actual implementation needs to be managed by HR, but the initiative needs to be driven right from the board level for it to be truly successful and have any kind of worthwhile meaning. Before I ask my next question to my panelists, we talked about diversity having various markers besides, we've been talking a lot about gender and race and stuff. When I had a conversation with, in Singapore with the head of diversity and inclusion for a very large financial institution, a lovely lady, I had the privilege of speaking to her, and she said something that really surprised me. She said, she indicated one specific marker of diversity as being the biggest issue. Actually, she said it's even bigger than gender. Gender is not the biggest issue with diversity we have, it's actually something else. Can anyone guess what it was?
Age.
Yes, it was age. She said ageism is today by far the biggest problem we have if you're talking about diversity and inclusion. William, I know this is something that's very close to your heart, given that you are very involved in training and LMD programs for businesses for your clients. What are your thoughts on that? Do you agree?
So we seem to be picking on the oldest person on the panel for some reason, with this particular comment. There's been a massive underinvestment as well in many industries. The oil and gas industry particularly call it the big crew change because of the massive underinvestment, but you can go across most industries. The downturn from 2008 meant that recruitment, training, general investment in people has been almost non-existent in some industries for quite a period of time now. And as we fail to invest in these people, then we've also got people who are getting very close to retirement and actually walking out of the door with all of that knowledge and experience in their heads. And so we've got a number of organizations out there in Asia, some of which I've spoken to as a result of some of the work that I'm doing, who've got now what they call bridging programs as well, where they're actually bringing the more aged people back into the organization, people who got the experience, and they don't have any operational role anymore. They have a role to motivate, to coach and to mentor basically individuals in the organisation. And I think it's a part of diversity where there is no downside to this. You're basically harnessing experience and everything that you don't want to walk out the door.
Any questions from the crowd? Yes, please. We have a volunteer who has a question for you.
The good part of holding and passing the mic is you don't have to really ask for a mic. So, good afternoon, my name is Sajid, I'm a student at VC. I'm a big believer in diversity. In fact, I've seen how companies are taking benefit of diversity. But at some point of time, I feel if you really have a very diverse school, don't you think we are also compromising on the collaboration? I mean, diversity and collaboration go hand in hand. So, some companies really do diversity for the sake of diversity or have a diverse group. But I've seen those companies also compromise on the collaboration side. So, any thoughts on this?
Do you want to elaborate a little bit more?
Sure. So when I was building my team back in 5 years ago, so it was for the North American operations, and when I was hiring people, one thing that I ensured that, so in India by the way, we have 30 states, and every state is very different, and it's in terms of language, in terms of eating habits. So when I was hiring people, I ensured that I'm not hiring people from the one region, I'm hiring from across the India. But it really helped me because it helped me in terms of not creating the countries. But at the same time, I felt that I really compromised on the collaboration because whenever I wanted to put these people together, I wanted to move them to a common objective or the goal, I used to find it a bit difficult. So that I felt that somewhere down the line I compromised on the collaboration. But still, the benefits of having a diverse group were there. I read the benefits. At the same time, I felt that I compromised on the collaboration side. So I'm more coming from there.
Can I answer that? And as a moderator, I'm not supposed to, but may I jump in?
Yeah.
I think I understand what you're asking me, but what you're basically saying is you formed a diverse group, but we're not able to get them to collaborate effectively. But that's not the problem with the diversity that you implemented or the group itself. It's more with the person managing the group. Like just the previous session, they were asking, I think it was Chris who asked the question about how is it that you get people to accept change? You're bringing a group of different people together, then the onus is on you as a manager or whoever it is, the team leader, to make that happen. So if there's a problem with the collaboration, I would think that it's more from the implementation side and not so much from the principle or the diversity itself. Do you think that's correct?
What about team selection?
Selection, yes.
Or rather, I would say, I also had almost 30% of women in the team, and I used to find it difficult in men and women collaborating. I feel that women are more collaborative rather than men.
That's true.
But at the same time, when you have the women and men in the team, I also really find it difficult. So I was more coming from the.
You just said that women are more collaborative, thereby establishing that men have a problem. That's your problem, right?
As a man, you are supposed to have diversity.
But again, you're right. Diversity for the sake of diversity is never going to work. Sajid, you wanted to say something? Carmel?
Just give it time to mic come on.
No, just actually, you just took the words out of my mouth, Manju. The main rationality of diversity is to bring the team in, and create an harmonious environment. And if we're not achieving that, then we don't blame diversity for it. We, not saying I blame you, but it's how we actually execute and implement diversity in the workplace.
Sorry, I think maybe we are using the word diversity too generically. And if you use it generically, you're losing the meaning. I think we understand what diversity means. And once we understand what diversity means, we can then understand what the programs that we can actually deploy so that people can embrace diversity, like re-age, training, retraining, the mix of male, female, could be in terms of competencies, the career ladder, career training. So when you can that sort of perspective, then it becomes a shared value right across the organization. But just to harp on about diversity being important and relevant and blah, 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 actually means nothing. So I think we should actually maybe bring down the argument to what diversity means and how do we actually tangibly look at elements that can be visible and can be embraced. I hope maybe that's clarified.
Anyone else to take that up? No, I fully agree with what you said, Joe, and it seems unbelievable, but I've just been told that we are actually right down to the last minute. I will just have one, probably, I'll give you time to make some closing statements perhaps, because if I ask a question, it may not give you enough time to do justice to it. Perhaps you want to share your views on what we have discussed so far.
So I just want to actually go back to the question about ageism. So maybe if you'd asked me this question 10 or 15 years ago, I may have had a very different answer for you. But I think that, as the population ages, as we live longer, there is a lot of knowledge in our older workforce, and I'm getting towards that being the older workforce now as well. But luckily for us, I think, a lot of that workforce can come back into the organisation as consultants. And I think it's just showing the metamorphosis of how roles change and the organisations change in terms of how people can come back into the business. So I do think there is a need to retain talent, there is a need to retain knowledge, and through the consultancy programme, and as long as your organisation has that positiveness, we can bring those individuals back and retain that knowledge within the business. I have within my team, again, 2 individuals above 60 years of age who are going through a consultancy programme with us.
It's fantastic, and I believe that's what William was trying to tell, that you need to bring people back, especially the senior members of the team who are leaving for whatever reason, bring them back, mentorship programs, keep those intelligence pools alive and kicking.
I'll be very brief, this time is running out, but very much similar case in Hector as in yours. We have a lot of, very precious, valuable asset, and those are the outgoing employees who reach the age of retirement. But we engage them back to make sure we retain the talent in-house. Next year in 2016, Hector will be celebrating our 40th anniversary as a company operating in the Hong Kong International Airport. So every year, actually, we have those long-serving staff award, that type of thing, and then the CEO happily go on the stage and then pass out the golden pins and things like that. So I still vividly remember some years ago, we just came out, 35 is the maximum. So next year, I'm sure there will be some 40, and it just says that we have been quite fortunate, let's say, to be able to retain those, long-timers with Hector. But what's next? I mean, people come and go. The next generation, those in the millennium, will they be that open to what we have been used to doing things like this and that? Are they used to that? I mean, this is challenging. So I just want to make sure that as food for thought is about retaining, retaining the experience. Those who are old coming back, as mentor, and also don't forget to also attract new blood into the industry.
Perhaps I'll just leave you with some of the figures. There's a society out there called the Diversity Inclusion Asia Network, DIAN. There's not too many companies involved in this yet, but there's a good spread in terms of the kinds of companies. But for those who actually have policies relating to all things diversity in that particular network, banks make up nearly 40% of that. Then it's legal, and then everyone else is pretty much between about 2 to 7%. So in terms of logistics, we don't figure too highly when it comes to policies or thoughts on that particular direction.
All right, and for me, I think the summary would be, we talk about diversity and inclusion, but are we doing anything about it? I've mentioned that we have a very large pool of Generation Y standing there and waiting to be called upon by, the unsexy industry, which is supply chain and logistics. So what are we doing about it? I'm very proud to say that I'm actually part of an organization. I run the Southeast Asian business out of Singapore. In our office, there are 5 mother tongues spoken in our office, and we're 6. So, it's about including diversity in our own office, in our own department. So I think let's just stop talking about diversity and, putting an action and executing it. I think that's what I would encourage everyone in our industry.
Thank you, everyone. So in summary, I think we can safely say that diversity is what you have and inclusion is what you do. Thank you again for being such a wonderfully participative audience. Can we have a round of applause for our panelists? Thank you, everyone.